Get your hands off that laptop, Julian. You are officially fired for gross misconduct and theft of company intellectual property. Security, escort this relic out of my building right now. Oliver Vance's voice echoed through the pristine, glass-walled conference room, his face twisted in a smug grin. I looked at the security guard standing awkwardly by the door, then down at the custom-built workstation I had used for the last 10 years. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I simply shut the lid, looked Oliver straight in the eye, and said, "Understood." He thought he had just stolen my life's work. What the arrogant 32-year-old CEO didn't know was that he had just pulled the pin on a financial grenade, and the countdown had already begun. To understand how we got to this point, you have to go back to 2016. Vance Industrial Manufacturing was a mid-sized fabrication company specializing in heavy machinery chassis for major automotive brands. When Richard Vance, the founder, hired me as the lead industrial designer, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Their assembly lines were outdated, their tolerances were too loose, and they were losing contracts to cheaper offshore suppliers. Richard was a practical man of the old school, a machinist who respected hard work and real expertise. He gave me a simple mandate: fix the design pipeline or we all go home. I spent my first 18 months on the factory floor, working alongside the line operators, studying the stamp presses, the CNC mills, and the welding bays. I realized that the company's biggest bottleneck was the lack of modularity. Every client wanted a slightly different chassis layout, which meant the factory had to spend 3 days retooling the machines for every new order. It was slow, expensive, and prone to errors. That was when I designed the Vance Modular Chassis System. It was a proprietary layout that used standardized structural nodes and adjustable crossmembers, allowing a single assembly line to switch between 5 different chassis sizes in less than 40 minutes. I drafted the blueprints on my own time, using my personal workstation at home, using mathematical load distribution formulas I had spent years perfecting. Before I showed the design to Richard, I did what any experienced engineer would do. I filed for a design patent. In 2015, the United States Patent and Trademark Office issued me U.S. Patent number 10,845,921. It was my intellectual property. When I finally presented the modular system to Richard, his eyes lit up. He knew it was the key to saving the company. But Richard also knew the company couldn't afford to buy the patent outright. So, we made a deal. My attorney, Lawrence Croft, drafted our 2016 employment agreement. Under Clause 14 Ceci, I granted Vance Industrial Manufacturing a revocable, non-exclusive, non-transferable license to manufacture products using my design patent. The terms were clear. The license was free as long as I remained employed as the lead industrial designer. However, if the company terminated my employment without cause, or if they breached the agreement by claiming sole ownership of the patent or my personal design assets, the license would automatically terminate within 48 hours. Furthermore, any unauthorized use of the design after termination would trigger a flat fee of $500,000 in liquidated damages, plus immediate injunctive relief. Richard signed the contract without hesitation. For the next 10 years, Vance Industrial flourished. The modular chassis system allowed us to land a massive contract with Apex Automotive, worth $45 million annually. We went from a struggling shop to a company with over $120 million in annual revenue. I was paid a comfortable salary of $15,000 a month, and Richard treated me like a partner. But last year, Richard's health began to fail. At 68, he decided to retire and hand the reins to his son Oliver. Oliver was 32, had an expensive MBA, and had never spent a single hour on a factory floor. He saw the company not as a community of skilled workers, but as a spreadsheet to be optimized. He arrived with a team of young consultants who wore matching suits and talked about synergy, asset optimization, and eliminating legacy redundancies. From the first week, I knew I was on Oliver's chopping block. I was 46, making a high salary, and I didn't hesitate to point out the flaws in his cost-cutting ideas. When he suggested replacing our domestic steel suppliers with cheaper, low-grade imported steel, I told him flat out that it would compromise the structural integrity of the chassis and violate our contract with Apex Automotive. Oliver didn't like being corrected, especially not in front of his board of directors. He started looking for ways to get rid of me. He wanted my job, my experience, and most importantly, my latest designs. I was currently working on the next generation electric vehicle chassis, which Apex Automotive was planning to adopt for their upcoming product line. Oliver knew that if he could fire me and keep the designs, he could replace me with a junior designer at a fraction of the cost. He began a campaign of subtle harassment. He shifted my office from the executive floor to a small room next to the noisy stamping presses. He excluded me from client meetings. He even tried to force me to sign a new intellectual property assignment agreement that would retroactively transfer all my past and future patents to the company. I took the document, handed it to Lawrence Croft, and had him write a polite letter explaining that I would not be signing away my personal assets. That was the turning point. Oliver realized he couldn't pressure me into giving up my patent, so he decided to take it by force. He plotted with his head of human resources, a corporate climber named Donald, to frame me for corporate espionage and theft. They wanted to create a cause for termination so they wouldn't have to pay my 12-month severance package of $180,000, and more importantly, so they could claim the rights to my designs. They didn't realize that my personal laptop, which I used for high-fidelity rendering because the company-provided machines were too slow, was legally my own property. I had paid for it myself, and it was registered as a personal tool under my original contract. But to Oliver, it was just a piece of company property containing files he wanted. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Oliver called me into the main conference room. Donald was sitting next to him, along with two burly security guards. The trap was set, but they had no idea that their trap was built on a foundation of sand, and I was about to wash it all away. "Please sit down, Julian," Donald said, sliding a thick blue folder across the mahogany table. His voice had that fake, practiced corporate empathy that always made my skin crawl. Oliver was leaning back in his chair, tapping a gold pen against his teeth, looking out the window at the manufacturing floor below. I didn't sit. I stood by the edge of the table, placing my personal leather briefcase on the chair. "I have a lot of work to finish on the Apex EV3 chassis models, Donald. Let's make this quick. What is this about?" Oliver stopped tapping his pen and turned his chair to face me. "It's about security, Julian, or rather your lack of it. We've been conducting a digital audit of our design servers, and we noticed something very disturbing. Over the last 3 months, large amounts of proprietary CAD files have been transferred from our secure local network to an external, unauthorized device. A personal laptop, to be specific. That laptop is sitting right there," I said, pointing to the silver custom-built mobile workstation on the table. "And as you know, I use it because the company-provided CAD machines cannot handle the real-time simulation rendering for the Apex project. Richard approved this arrangement in writing 5 years ago. The files are local and encrypted. Richard is no longer running this company," Oliver snapped, his voice sharp. "I am, and under my administration, we do not allow employees to keep proprietary company property on their personal devices. We have reason to believe you are planning to sell these next-generation chassis designs to our competitors. In fact, we have email logs showing you communicating with a representative from a rival firm." I almost laughed. The email logs were undoubtedly conversations I had with the engineering team at Apex Automotive, who were simply asking for my feedback on their manufacturing standards. But Oliver didn't want the truth. He wanted a pretext. "Donald," Oliver said, gesturing to the HR director, "show him the termination letter." Donald cleared his throat. "Julian, due to this severe breach of our security protocols and intellectual property policy, we are terminating your employment immediately for cause. Because this is a termination for cause, you are not eligible for any severance pay, and all outstanding bonuses are hereby forfeited. You must leave the premises immediately. And your laptop," Oliver added, a greedy glint in his eye, "stays here. It contains Vance Industrial proprietary files, which means it is now evidence in a corporate espionage investigation. We will be holding it until our legal team completes a full forensic analysis." I looked at Oliver. He was smug, convinced he had just pulled off the perfect heist. He thought he was getting the complete unencrypted design files for the Apex EV3 project, which were saved on that laptop's NVMe drive. He thought he had saved the company $180,000 in severance, and that he would now own my designs forever without paying a dime. That laptop, I said quietly, is my personal property. I purchased it with my own funds, and it is registered as an approved personal tool under Appendix C of my 2016 contract. The company has no right to seize it. We have every right to protect our intellectual property. Oliver sneered. If you try to take it out of this building, security will detain you, and we will file criminal theft charges with the local police department. Do you want to leave here in handcuffs, Julian? Or do you want to walk out like a professional? I looked at the two security guards. One of them, a guy named Terry, had worked at Vance Industrial for 8 years. He looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed to be part of this circus. He knew me. He knew I had saved the factory from closing down, but he had a job to keep. I took a deep breath. I knew that if I got angry, if I raised my voice, or if I tried to snatch the laptop, I would be playing right into their hands. They wanted a scene. They wanted a reason to call the cops. They wanted to paint me as the unstable, disgruntled employee who had to be restrained. Understood, I said. Oliver blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of resistance. He had expected me to scream, to threaten lawsuits, or to beg for my job. You're not going to argue? No, I replied, opening my briefcase. I will pack my personal belongings, my notebook, my reference manuals, and my coffee mug. The laptop remains here under protest. I assume you will keep it in a secure location. It will be locked in the IT server closet until our attorneys review the contents, Oliver said, leaning forward to grab the silver laptop. He held it like a trophy. I spent 10 minutes packing my desk. The entire design department was dead silent as I walked through the cubicles, carrying my small box of personal items. My team members looked at me with a mix of shock and sadness. They knew what I had done for this company. They knew Oliver was making a terrible mistake, but they were too afraid of losing their own livelihoods to speak up. At the main exit, Terry, the security guard, swiped his card to let me out. I'm sorry, Julian, he whispered, out of earshot of the HR director who was shadowing us. This isn't right. Thanks, Terry, I said, giving him a small nod. Don't worry about it. Just keep your head down. I walked out into the pouring rain, carrying my box. As I sat in my car, looking up at the Vance Industrial sign, I pulled out my personal phone and called Lawrence Croft. Lawrence, I said as soon as he answered. Oliver just took the bait. He fired me for cause, refused my severance, and seized my laptop. Did you remain calm? Lawrence asked, his voice steady and professional. I didn't say a word, I replied. I let him take it. The laptop is locked in their server closet right now. Excellent, Lawrence said. That means they have officially committed a material breach of the 2016 agreement. The 48-hour clock has started. I'll draft the formal patent revocation notice tonight. Let's see how long Oliver can run a $45 million assembly line without the rights to the chassis holding it together. The next morning, I sat in the mahogany-lined conference room of Croft & Partners. Lawrence Croft, my IP attorney, was a sharp, meticulous man of 55. He was reviewing the original 2016 contract and my patent certificate for U.S. patent number 10,845,921. On the table between us were 3 empty coffee cups and a stack of printed emails. Oliver really thought he could just claim ownership because the files were on company servers, Lawrence said, a dry smile touching his lips. He doesn't understand the difference between file possession and patent ownership. Under federal law 35 U.S.C. Section 261, patents are personal property. You never assigned this patent to Vance Industrial. You only granted them a license under Clause 14C of your employment contract. And that license is contingent on my employment, I noted. Exactly, Lawrence said, tapping his finger on the contract. Let's look at the wording of Clause 14C again. The licensee's right to manufacture, assemble, or sell products incorporating U.S. patent number 10,845,921 is a non-exclusive, non-transferable license granted solely in consideration of the licensor's active employment. Upon termination of the licensor's employment for any reason, or upon any material breach of this agreement by the licensee, including the unauthorized retention of the licensor's personal tooling or hardware, This license shall automatically terminate 48 hours following written notice of termination or breach. They've held my laptop for over 24 hours now, I said, and they officially terminated me yesterday morning. Then we are in a perfect position, Lawrence said. Oliver's actions constitute a double breach. First, they terminated you without cause. Their claims of espionage are completely baseless and won't hold up in court for 5 minutes, which means they breached the termination terms. Second, they illegally seized your personal laptop, which is registered as your personal asset under Appendix C. By doing so, they triggered the automatic license termination clause. We are going to send them the formal notice of license revocation and material breach. Lawrence turned to his computer and opened a document. I've already prepared the draft. We are sending it via certified mail and courier directly to Oliver's office, with copies to the board of directors and the legal department of Apex Automotive. Why Apex? I asked. Because Apex is their biggest client, Lawrence explained. Under their agreement, Vance Industrial guarantees that all products supplied are free from any claims of intellectual property infringement. The moment Apex's compliance department hears that Vance Industrial's chassis designs are no longer licensed, they will have no choice but to halt all shipments. They cannot risk being dragged into a federal patent infringement lawsuit. What about the customs office? I asked. We have a shipment of 600 chassis scheduled to cross the border into Canada on Monday morning. I've already drafted a petition for an exclusion order under Section 337 of the Tariff Act, Lawrence replied. We will notify U.S. Customs and Border Protection that Vance Industrial is exporting unlicensed products that infringe on U.S. patent number 10,845,921. Once the customs agents see the active patent dispute and the license revocation notice, they will impound those containers at the port of exit. Oliver's entire logistics chain will grind to a halt. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. 10 years ago, I had helped build that logistics chain. I knew every node, every warehouse, and every customs broker. I knew that Apex Automotive ran on a strict just-in-time delivery model. They kept less than 2 days of chassis inventory at their assembly plants. If Vance Industrial missed a single delivery, Apex's production line would shut down, costing them millions of dollars a day in lost revenue. Under their contract, Vance Industrial would be liable for every penny of those losses. Let's sign it, I said. I picked up the pen and signed my name at the bottom of the revocation notice. Lawrence immediately handed the document to his assistant, who rushed it to the courier. Now we wait, Lawrence said. The 48-hour clock started at 9:00 a.m. yesterday, when they handed you the termination letter. The license officially expires tomorrow, Saturday, at 9 a.m. By Monday morning, Oliver Vance is going to wake up to a massive operational nightmare. I spent the weekend at home, tending to my garden and catching up on sleep. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have to check my email every hour or worry about factory floor emergencies. I knew the storm was coming, but I was sitting in the quiet center of it. On Sunday night, I received a short text message from my former lead designer, a young woman named Clara, whom I had mentored for 4 years. Julian, the IT department is trying to open your laptop, the text read. They brought in an external consultant, but they can't get past the BIOS encryption. Oliver is furious. He's been screaming at the IT manager all afternoon. Do you know what's going on? I smiled and typed back. Don't worry about it, Clara. Just stay clear of the blast zone. Monday is going to be a very interesting day. I went to bed early and slept soundly. I knew that by the time the sun came up, Oliver Vance's expensive MBA wouldn't be able to save him from the legal reality he had so arrogantly ignored. Monday morning arrived with a clear sky, but inside the headquarters of Vance Industrial, a Category 5 hurricane was raging. At 8:30 a.m., my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. The caller ID showed Oliver Vance's direct office line. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, Donald, the HR director, called. I ignored that one too. By 9:15 a.m., I had received 7 missed calls and 3 urgent emails with the subject line, Urgent. Apex production issue. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and dialed Lawrence Croft. Good morning, Lawrence. I think they've received the notices. Oh, they certainly did, Lawrence chuckled. My courier delivered the hard copies to Oliver's office at exactly 8 a.m. and Apex Automotive's chief legal officer received his copy at 8:05 a.m. According to my contacts, Apex's compliance team immediately flagged Vance Industrial's parts database. They've halted all payments and refused to accept any incoming shipments containing your chassis design. What about the Canadian border shipment? I asked. 6 cargo trucks carrying 600 modular chassis are currently sitting in a holding yard at the Blue Water Bridge border crossing in Port Huron, Lawrence said. U.S. Customs and Border Protection officials received our Section 337 petition. They've placed a temporary hold on the entire shipment, pending clarification of the licensing dispute. Oliver is facing a $250,000 daily penalty from Apex for delayed delivery, and the trucks are costing him $10,000 an hour in standby fees. At 10 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Philip Ross, the vice president of procurement at Apex Automotive. Philip was a pragmatic man who only cared about keeping his assembly lines running. I answered. Julian, Philip said, his voice tense but respectful. I'm looking at a patent revocation notice from your attorney. Our legal team says we can't touch Vance Industrial's chassis without infringing on your patent. The line in Michigan is going to run out of parts in 24 hours. What the hell is going on over there? Philip, as you know, I was terminated last Thursday, I explained calmly. Oliver Vance accused me of espionage, refused to pay my contractual severance, and illegally seized my personal laptop containing the design files. Under my 2016 agreement, his actions automatically terminated the patent license. Vance Industrial is currently manufacturing and shipping my patented designs without a license. That idiot, Philip muttered, cursing under his breath. He told us you resigned to pursue other opportunities. Look, Julian, I don't care about Vance's family drama. I care about my production line. If we shut down, it costs us $2 million a day. What is it going to take to resolve this? My attorney has already drafted the settlement terms, Philip, I replied. Vance Industrial needs to pay my severance, pay the liquidated damages for the contract breach, and buy out the patent license permanently so your production is never interrupted again. The moment the funds clear, I will sign the patent transfer. I'm calling the Vance Industrial Board of Directors right now, Philip said. They will make this right, or we will cancel their entire contract and sue them into bankruptcy. Hang tight, Julian. 5 minutes after I hung up with Philip, my phone rang again. It was Oliver. This time, I decided to answer. Julian, what the hell did you do? Oliver screamed, his voice cracking with panic. You blocked our shipment at the border. You contacted Apex. They're threatening to cancel our contract and sue us. You signed a contract. You can't just revoke our license. Actually, Oliver, I can, I said, my voice cold and steady. Under Clause 14 which you obviously didn't bother to read. The moment you fired me without cause and kept my personal laptop, you breached the agreement. The license expired at 9:00 a.m. on Saturday. Every chassis you have manufactured since then is a federal patent infringement. This is blackmail, he yelled. I'll have you arrested. We have your laptop. You have a locked laptop that you can't access, I replied. And if your IT department attempts to break the encryption, they will be violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, as that machine is registered as my personal property under Appendix C. My attorney has already filed a motion for an expedited injunction. By tomorrow morning, federal marshals will be serving a cease and desist order to shut down your entire factory floor. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Oliver's heavy breathing. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the stark realization that he had destroyed his father's legacy in less than 6 months. What do you want? He whispered, his voice trembling. You have the settlement proposal from Lawrence Croft, I said. Read it carefully. The price has gone up. We are no longer negotiating just the severance. You will pay the full 12 months of severance, which is $180,000. You will pay the $500,000 in liquidated damages for the breach of contract. And if you want the rights to the chassis design to keep the Apex contract, you will buy the patent outright for $4 million. $4 million, Oliver gasped. We don't have that kind of cash on hand. That's insane. Then I suggest you call your board of directors and your father, I said. You have until 5 p.m. today to sign the agreement and wire the funds to my escrow account. If the money isn't there, the injunction goes into effect. U.S. Customs will seize your inventory, and Apex will terminate their contract. Have a nice afternoon, Oliver. I hung up before he could respond. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still warm. At 3:30 p.m. on Monday, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 6 months, Richard Vance. I answered immediately. Julian. Richard's voice sounded older, tired, but it carried the same gravelly warmth I remembered. I hear my son has been making a complete mess of the house I built. Hello, Richard, I said softly. I'm sorry it came to this. I never wanted to hurt the company, but Oliver left me with no choice. I know, Julian. I've spent the last 3 hours in an emergency board meeting, Richard sighed. Philip Ross called me directly. He told me that if we didn't resolve this with you today, Apex is pulling their contract and suing us for breach. That would destroy Vance Industrial. I built this company from a 3-man machine shop, and I won't let Oliver's arrogance burn it to the ground. Is Oliver still CEO? I asked. Not anymore, Richard said, his tone firm. The board has stripped him of his executive authority, effective immediately. He's been escorted out of the building. Donald from HR is also gone. I've stepped back in as interim CEO, just long enough to sign your settlement and transition the leadership to someone who actually knows how to run a business. Richard paused for a moment. I looked at the contract you signed in 2016, Julian. You were always fair with us. Oliver thought he could play corporate hardball, but he didn't realize that in our industry, the guy who designs the chassis owns the road. I've instructed our finance department to wire the full settlement amount to your attorney's escrow account immediately. We are paying the $180,000 in severance, the $500,000 in liquidated damages, and the $4 million for the full patent buyout. Total of $4,680,000. The wire is already in flight. Thank you, Richard, I said. I appreciate you stepping in to do the right thing. And Julian, Richard added, your personal laptop is sitting on my desk right now. It is completely untouched. I will have it couriered to your house along with the signed settlement agreements within the hour. I only ask that you sign the patent transfer and notify Customs to release our shipments as soon as the wire clears. Of course, I said. Once Lawrence confirms the funds, we will submit the paperwork immediately to release the cargo. Good luck to you, Julian, Richard said. You're a brilliant engineer. I only wish my son had inherited a fraction of your intelligence. Thank you, Richard. Take care of yourself. 2 hours later, Lawrence Croft called me, his voice bursting with excitement. Julian, the wire has cleared. $4,680,000 is sitting in our escrow account. The funds are fully verified. I've sent the patent assignment forms to Vance Industrial's legal team, and we've submitted the withdrawal of our Section 337 petition to U.S. Customs. Shortly after, a courier arrived at my front door. He handed me a secure leather bag containing my personal laptop and the fully executed settlement documents. I booted up the laptop, entered my BIOS password, and checked the file integrity. Everything was intact, encrypted, and untouched. I sat back in my chair, looking out at the evening sun filtering through the window. 5 days ago, I had been escorted out of my office like a criminal, falsely accused of espionage, and stripped of my livelihood. Today, I was $68 million richer, my reputation was completely cleared, and the arrogant CEO who tried to ruin me was out of a job. I didn't waste any time. The next morning, I registered my new business, Mercer Engineering Solutions. I leased a modern office space in downtown Detroit and invested in top-of-the-line design workstations. A week later, Clara, my former lead designer, called me. She told me that Vance Industrial was in chaos under the interim management and that morale on the design floor was at an all-time low. Clara, I said, how would you like to come work for me? I'll match your current salary, give you full health benefits, and you won't have to deal with any arrogant MBAs. I'll send you my resume in 10 minutes. She laughed. Within a month, I had hired 3 other senior designers from Vance Industrial. They brought their expertise, their passion, and their loyalty. Our new firm quickly gained a reputation for innovative, high-precision industrial designs. We didn't need to cut corners, and we didn't need to lie to our clients. One afternoon, a few months later, I was attending an industry expo in Chicago. As I walked past the manufacturing booths, I saw Oliver Vance standing near the back, wearing a cheap suit and handing out pamphlets for a second-tier logistics consulting firm. He looked tired, defeated, and completely out of his depth. He saw me, froze for a second, and then looked down at his shoes, pretending to read his pamphlets. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't need to. I just smiled, turned around, and walked back to my team. I had built my career on solid engineering and mutual respect. Oliver had tried to build his on corporate theft and arrogance. In the end, the blueprints of our lives had played out exactly as designed.